So my first job was a security guard at the Winnipeg bus depot. And I must tell you, there's never been a greater den of scum and villainy than you can see at the Winnipeg bus depot. I would be sitting there, my partner, we'd be standing up against the wall, watching the chaos unfold in the Winnipeg bus depot. And people would come up and they'd ask us questions like, where's the bathroom, or what are the hours of such and such. Do you know there's a dog being strangled outside? Or do you know that this person's got a handgun? It was quite an adventure in the Winnipeg bus depot. One thing I did notice, though, is that people always came to me to ask me the questions. I had a partner sitting right here, but they always came to me. You can tell this, by the way, when you don't actually answer the questions. And after, I was a social science guy, and after quite a few shifts of this, where the partner was all sorts of different, races, the partner was some of them, I'd rather ask them myself. I mean, they were, ex-police. Some of them looked much better able to. I realized that what was going on was I didn't have the words for this, but I had tall people privilege. I thought it was an interesting thing. I had tall people privilege. I went off, I did some research then, I did some research now for this, and it's interesting because if you're a male over 5'10", for every inch, there's an extra $1,000 a year, apparently, you're supposed to make. So I'm like, 10 grand up on that. So, and I can't imagine what I actually would have made had I been 5'10". But anyway, so there's a tall person privilege. So I started, thinking about privileges at a pretty early time. Later, as I had daughters, I, of course, became very much aware of male privilege. Right? What father would not want the best for their daughters? And of course, I was very much aware of male privilege. As I started to have friends who either were LGBTQI or certainly became that way, I became very much aware of hetero privilege. I just celebrated my 18th wedding anniversary. I'm certainly aware of hetero privilege. As I had friends that were disabled, or my father who became disabled, I became aware of able privilege. And of course, in the seminary, the last 2 years, I've become very much aware of white privilege. So, we have this professor who teaches us preaching, and this professor, Dr. Johnson, has done a lot of work in something that he would call the tragic vision of African American religion. I've written a book on that. I've read the book. I noticed throughout his class, he couldn't help but spew out various bits of this coming up. Most of it just splatting behind the wall behind me, because of course I'm not really catching most of it. But every now and again I would catch a vision, just a glimpse of this tragic vision. Then I read the book, and I went, okay, again, a glimpse of the tragic vision. And then finally I grabbed him and forced him to sit and spend a good half hour with me, and we sat and we talked about this tragic vision. And for a brief moment, or actually it was a bit more than a brief, but for a brief moment, it just the vision was laid bare. The fog of white privilege parted, and I could see, at least I thought I could see, the vision. And I asked him, I said, with everything that you know, what do you do? What do you do? There's a pretty ambiguous question. Some of it could have been, what do you, Dr. Johnson, do as an African American? It could have been, what do you, Grant, do as a white male? It could have been a generalized, what do you as a Christian church? What is your response? What do you do? What do you do? And Dr. Johnson leaned forward, and I leaned forward to meet him, and he said, you suffer. That's what he said. You suffer. This burned in my mind. It was a tremendous moment, at least for me. You suffer. So much of us as good Christian folks, we see the problem, fix the problem, right? Light bulb's burnt out, change the light bulb. Dinner's burning, reduce the heat. But we are missing something, and that something resonated at the core of you suffer. My daughter was having a typical 4th grade angst temper tantrum. Ran into the room, collapsed on the bed, just in tears, distraught. I went in, lay down beside her, and said, what's up? And she started to pour out 4th grade angst. Pour out 4th grade angst. Hates the house, doesn't like the room, hates her bed, she's got no friends. Broken daughter. I should fix the daughter. That's what I'm thinking. But a little voice inside of my head, the voice of Dr. Bob Albers, started speaking. Dr. Bob Albers, who taught, of course, pastoral care here for many years, he's got generations of students, he's been doing this kind of stuff for 50 years. And one of the things he makes clear is that in 50 years of pastoral care, he's never fixed anybody. He would use the word heal, but I'm using fixed. He never fixed anybody. God fixes people. All he could do is provide the blessing of presence. Right? In my mind, he suffered with the people. So, as I'm laying there, just about to correct my daughter, because yes, she does like the house, yes, she's got friends and so on, I realized, no, I don't think so. And I laid back, and we suffered together. And I think both of us, actually, there was some reconciliation there that was going on. It's interesting to me that God saw the problem, fixed the problem, but didn't ignore the suffering between the problem in Jesus. Right? We as Christians kind of, in fact, it's interesting, it's Advent season, and even today on Facebook there was something on this. Advent season, this seems to be a big rush to Christmas. Forgetting that Christmas, the actual highlight, is a homeless child being born in a stable of manure and ultimately being put into a food trough. Right? Who is suffering in that story? Right? God is suffering in that story. There's plenty of suffering throughout the gospel, but then of course we get to the end, right? Where, again, as church people, we rush usually, and we all know this, we rush basically from Palm Sunday right to Easter, with a nodding glance maybe to Good Friday, right? Although again, Good Friday is not even a holiday here, right? But what part of suffering can we not see there? We, in fact, done very well by Nancy with a Jew being brutalized, tortured, and ultimately executed by the state, by an oppressive state. Again, suffering between seeing a problem and fixing a problem. I watched this documentary recently called Hitler's Children. I highly recommend it. The documentary itself was about the children of well-known Nazis. Hitler did not have children, but of well-known Nazis. And these... it's an interesting thing to sexism, by the way. It's 2013, you apparently finally thought that maybe the Nazis had children. Isn't that interesting? I mean, this is the first time the documentary showed up. They focused on many of them, but one of them in particular was a guy named Rainer Hess. Rainer Hess was the grandson of Rudolf Hess. Are we time? We're good? Done?
No, I'm saying yeah.
Okay, Rudolf Hess. Rudolf Hess was the commandant of Auschwitz. Rudolf Hess had a family, nice little family house with basically a walled-up fence, where behind the fence was the concentration camp. Reynard would be looking at these pictures of his infant and child father playing with toys in front of this fence, toys that he eventually discovered were even made by the people in Auschwitz. This had a very profound impact on him, and he wanted to go to Auschwitz. He ended up teaming up with an Israeli journalist. They went off to Auschwitz. Rainer had been taught since birth, basically, don't cry. His father was a piece of work, too, by the way. So don't cry. Keep it in. He's going around. He's got a pretty stoic look on. He finally gets into this room. And in this room is him and 20 Israeli teenagers. Him and 20 Israeli teenagers. And they were now having a Q&A session. It may be obviously uncomfortable. Anybody would be uncomfortable. They started asking these questions. What are you doing here? What do you hope to accomplish? You could see him just buckling under this pressure. Eventually, an Auschwitz survivor was in the back. And he wanted to come up and shake Rainer's hand. He comes up, shakes Rainer's hand, and at this point he says to him, you weren't there, you didn't do this. And at that moment, Rainer broke. They hugged. And watching it, all you could see were two people, privilege, who knows who had the privilege at that point, two people joined together in this sort of shimmering sea of grace. And around that, I don't think either were Christian, but around that you could see the arms of Jesus. It was a wonderful reconciliation moment, one that would only come really from Colossians 1:20, from the blood of the cross. Suffering bring reconciliation. I've heard it said, every Sunday is Easter Sunday. I like that. But we should also appreciate every day is somebody's Good Friday. And somebody you probably know, maybe somebody you don't, certainly somebody you don't, but it's Good Friday. We shouldn't necessarily be in a rush to get to somebody's Easter. Jesus is found in Good Friday as well as in Easter. I hope that was close.